Okay, I think we should get started. And I don't know if. Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. So, can I ask all of you to just move up a notch, please? Thank you. Great. Well, I just want to start out by saying good morning to all of you. Hope you guys are well. Yeah? Excellent. Okay. Well, we're very happy to have some time together with you and a warm welcome once again. What we're going to talk today about is the issue of human security. And we're going to hear about young people who are in different parts of the world who will talk about the issues that they're facing with respect to climate change and how that's affecting human security. But we're going to need your help to work through issues that are human security related but belong to all of us. So how can we problem solve together? Okay, and so with that, I'm going to welcome all of you, and we've got some of the pop family over here. So this is a session hosted by the pop movement, and let me ask Drisha, I think, who's going to get us started to get the warm up going, please, and then we'll take it from there. And a warm welcome once again to all of you.
Welcome everyone to our educational workshop on human security within the context of environmental degradation. I'm Drisha Pathak and I will be your moderator for today. I have with me my team, Komal Mittal, Ivan Ranson, Philo Magdalene, Dr. Norma Patricia, and a few more members from the pop movement. To begin with, I would like to first extend my sincere thanks to our partner, World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates, for giving us the pop movement, where pop stands for Protect Our Planet movement, this amazing opportunity to organize and conduct this workshop in a hybrid mode. Our senior mentor, Dr. Ash Pachauri, is present with all the attendees in South Korea in person, and the rest of the pop family is joining you all via Zoom from different countries, and we are here from almost 7 countries of the world. We have collected here today because this conference serves as a great platform for the young people to connect and to stay together. The key aspect of the workshop is the presentation of case studies by youth leaders who have witnessed a climate disaster event firsthand. We want to expose you to the first-hand experience and lessons, equip you with possible tools to respond and act, and inspire you to incorporate human security in your realities and take action. This workshop will actively engage your participation through discussion and question and answers within the with the case studies presented by our experts. Today, it's our absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Thomas Stelzer, Dean and Executive Secretary of the International Anti-Corruption Academy, who will be telling us more about the multilateral UN perspective of human security. Over to you, sir.
Maybe what we'll do is we'll start with an introduction. Let me warmly welcome Thomas Stelzer, please. A big hand, everybody. A big hand, please. Tom, a warm welcome. And we'd love to start with just a little bit of an introduction, if possible, please, on the issue of human security, and if you could talk to us a little bit, and particularly with respect to young people and the issue of climate change.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Is this on?
I don't think so. Maybe you want to try this one.
No, I think.
Thank you.
High tech. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the session. That's a session that refers to everybody, to each one of you, human security. So maybe I should just start with what the concept is. Absolutely. And then we discuss how each one of you can contribute to secure human security and to develop human security in a holistic way. Now, the concept is quite new. It was first coined in 1994 in the first Human Development Report. That's a report issued by the UNDP You might have heard of the UNDP. It's one of the UN organizations. In fact, it's a fund. It's a fund for the development. It's located in New York with offices all over the world. And the purpose of this UNDP is to help the 193 member states to fulfill and implement the Sustainable Development Agenda. That's the issue today. It wasn't always like this because many of the terms are quite new. The UN, what we do there, has been developing very rapidly in the last 2 decades. But whenever somebody talks to you about the Sustainable Development Agenda, it means basically the 17 SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, or Agenda 2030, which they also called. Now, the SDGs were the results of a long process, which sped up in 1994 with the coining of the notion human security. Now, human security, in fact, refers to 7 issues. You know, what is important about human security is it looks at the global vulnerabilities for the first time, not from a state prism, but from an individual prism. It looks at the people. It returns to what the first article of the UN Charter refers to. We, the peoples of the United Nations. You know, in the meantime, this has been a little bit perverted. And very people say it has become we, the governments of the United Nations, which unfortunately is very true. But, and not always to governments. For those of you who were at the panel yesterday, you know, Shirin Ebadi referred to this very strongly. Not in all the countries the governments really represent the people as they should. But of course that's an internal issue. It also depends on the people to be represented. So this is something which is very difficult to tackle. Of course we all want to achieve democracy, that's the big ideal. But democracy is a very lofty concept. You know, there might not be one country in the world who has 100% perfect democracy. You know, it's something we all are striving for, and we're doing worse or better, but this is what we want to achieve. You know, a people's-centered political system where everybody is represented, but of course where there are also institutions that make the system governable. Because if it's only a base democracy, it's very difficult to achieve results. So you need, of course, ways to elect your representatives. You need ways, you know, to separate the powers. So all of this, every country has to take care of. Some do better, some do later. There's a big effort right now going on. You might have followed that. You know, there's the Summit of Democracies last year that President Biden convoked, which is very democracy-centered. How can we help members to achieve a higher degree of democracy and a more people-centered democracy? But let's go back to the human development, to human security. So human security, most important thing, it is people-centered, centers on the individual. Who is supposed to benefit from this human security? Each person in the world, cui bono, who should benefit. So, and there are 7 different topics that all have to come together. There's the economic security, of course. That means assured income for individual. Because without income, it's very difficult to provide for your opportunities and to provide life in a materialistic world. The second one is food security. You know, food security means that people have both physical and economic access to food. It's not enough to see food in a supermarket. You also have to be in a position to go and buy it. So physical and economic access. This is something we have not reached today, of course, globally. You know, it depends, you know, the situation is fluctuating, but around 800 million people in the world today are not food secure. So they cannot be sure when they get up in the morning that they will not go to bed hungry in the evening. The next one is health security. Very important. You know, it's a protection from diseases and also unhealthy lifestyles. You know, this is very important. It's a new concept. Protection from unhealthy lifestyles. You know, diseases is clear. You know, access to medical treatment. When you get up in the morning, you feel sick, you have a pain, you can go to a doctor and get medical treatment. But of course, you know, protection from an unhealthy lifestyle. You know, what we call the non-communicable diseases. Diseases that don't spread by virus, but these are diseases that you are responsible yourself. by drinking too much sugar, for example, by consuming too much of this very deceiving drinks you find in supermarkets with very high sugar content. You know, sugar today is everywhere. You know, from the pizza to the soft drink, and this is why, for example, diabetes has become one of the most spread health issues today. And that is non-communicable. It's something that we inflict upon ourselves. Or heart attack, you know, it's a result of unhealthy lifestyles. People who don't move anymore, who take the car wherever they go, you know, and who just sit in their seats all day. So this is very dangerous for you, because a healthy lifestyle also provides a high health standard for you. But these are things we're responsible ourselves. But we have to be aware of that. The fourth is environmental security. You know, this is being protected from long and short-term ravages of nature, man-made threats of nature, and deterioration of the natural environment. You know, that also includes access to clean water and protection from air pollution. You know, because if you live in a city with very polluted air, you know, we have statistics that the lifespan is shrinking. So being protected from air pollution, being assured a healthy environment, that's a very important issue of human security. The next one is personal security. This is protection from physical violence, but also from domestic abuse. Also, protection from predatory adults, very important for young people. Young people are protected by law from predatory adults. You know, that's very important. You know, more and more people live in big cities today. You know, very soon half the world population will live in big cities. So urban crime is becoming one of the important issues. Then community security. That's the next one. You know, this is the protection from the loss of traditional relationships. You know, the threat against minorities and ethnic groups. And finally, the seventh and the last seven aspects of human security is political security. This is the implementation of basic human laws, the rule of law, good governance, access to the judiciary, that you can defend yourselves against those who are stronger, richer, more wealthy. You know, opportunities are unfortunately very unevenly shared in this world. And during the last years, you might have, there have been a lot of studies, you know, on increasing imbalances, global imbalances, which cause crisis. You know, one of the things I've learned in my many years in the United Nations is that every crisis is the result of unsustainable imbalances. You know, as long as only 600 million people who are hungry, you know, this still, it sounds cynical, but unfortunately that's all it is. You know, the world doesn't care. But if it tips, you know, it becomes unsustainable, like in 2008, when we had the last global food crisis, when we had food riots in 35 countries, it tipped. You know, it was just a little, it is like you have to imagine, you might have seen this caricature where of this dike, this dam in Netherlands, which is leaning against the flood. And there's the little boy holding the dike with one finger. This is the very fragile balance we are dealing with today in the world. You know, the imbalances are very threatening and they are very unstable. So we always need to make sure that the positive aspects are just overwhelming the negative ones. You know, unfortunately, this is all we can get pragmatically. You know, as I think it was one of the UN Secretary Generals who said, the UN is not there to provide the world with paradise, but to protect them from hell. And this is tough, but that's true. You know, so what we are struggling is to keep a certain balance, you know, to prevent that they just tip and turn into crisis. So this is the concept of human security. But this is, of course, the theoretical concept of human security. But now, what is the next step? How does this affect you now? What is your role now? Now, ever since after 94, the next big step was the so-called MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals. You might have heard about them. They are now out of fashion, they're history, but they were very important because they were the first effort to sort of put all the development issues into baskets, to make them more understandable, more implementable. So there were 7 MDGs. Now the MDGs, they were great because they were the first time they really galvanized political will. And they really helped us to conceptualize many of the issues. But they had big shortcomings. They were not democratically, not inclusively negotiated. Some of the Millennium Development Goals were the product of very fertile minds, of people who just sat down and thought them up, And, they had 6, and then somebody said, oh my God, but we have forgotten environment. So they added a 7th, So this was very, very improvised. But nevertheless, they were strong. And they gave us a framework for 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. And they really spurred progress in many, many areas, because we had indicators of how to measure progress. And we got together every year, and there was big progress. But then, when in 2015 they came to an end, they were a 15-year life cycle. So we had to think at the United Nations, how do we come up with a successor arrangement? How do we succeed the MDGs? How do we make it better? And in 2012, we had this conference in Rio de Janeiro, Rio Plus 20. In 92, there was the first Earth conference in Rio de Janeiro. It's the first global conference on inclusive development. And 20 years later, there was Rio Plus 20. And the target of Rio Plus 20 was to come up with a future system, of a successor regime of the MDGs. And so this was a very dramatic preparatory process because you had to get the whole world together in Rio to come up with something which could be implemented afterwards, where everybody had ownership, which was not just imposed on the world like the MDGs, but which had a much, much stronger democratic base. And I played a role at the time because at this time I was Assistant Secretary General for Policy Coordination at the United Nations. So in fact, all of this stuff went over my table, and the Department for Sustainable Development they reported through me. So we were very much involved, and I was also the Secretary of the CB. CB is the Chiefs Executive Board, where the Secretary General meets twice a year with the 27 leaders of the international system. The UN is not only the glass palace on the East River. That's only Secretariat. But the UN exists, you're all political scientists, you know this. So this is UN 101. But the UN exists of 27 different parts. Secretariat, then the funds and programs, then the specialized agencies, and the other related organizations, including the World Bank, the IMF. So it's 27 organizations, or 27 heads of the international system, that the Secretary General meets twice a year in the so-called CB. No, I was Secretary of the CB for 5 years. So I prepared 11 CBs, logistically, but also content-wise. And the preparation for Rio Plus 20 was very much carried out by the CB. So we tried to bring the whole UN system together to forge a common position, which would be strong enough to convince the world in Rio Plus 20. And we achieved that. And the success of Rio Plus 20, I think, can be deducted very much to the unity of the international system. Everybody came to Rio under the leadership of Ban Ki-moon and delivered. The sustainable development system rests of 3 pillars: the economic pillar, the environmental pillar, and the social pillar. Ever since the 90s, these pillars have been growing. The economic pillar we don't have to care about because the world became incredibly richer in the last few decades. So that's taken care of itself. The environmental pillar is also pretty well represented. There is a very lively civil society infrastructure. There are many NGOs who deal with the environmental pillar. So there's a lot of advocacy for this pillar. The weakest pillar was the social pillar. You know, just a few weeks before Rio Plus 20, the ILO, the International Labour Organization, issued a report on the social status of the world, and this was really sobering. It told us that more than 3 billion people in the world have no access or not enough access to social safety nets. So everything that we, you know, in the North are accustomed to, clean water, access to medical treatment, you know, value jobs where you're protected against layoffs, you know, where you receive salaries when you're sick, where you have guaranteed, you know, hours you have to work. We don't have to work 80 hours a week, but only 40 hours or 35, depends on the country. Where you have a day off during the week, where you have a pension rights afterwards. So all these jobs, you know, are reserved to very few people. So more than 3 billion people didn't have access to social safety nets. So this was very sobering just before Rio Plus 20. So this was the weakest of the 3 pillars when we came to Rio. But, you know, make a long story short, and you cut me off when you want me to stop, because I like to talk about these things. They might be interesting for you, but, you know, they're very interesting for the genesis and for where I'm coming to in a second.
Yes, absolutely.
What you need to do. So the outcome paper of Rio was the future we want. You know, this was the outcome paper of Rio, which had consensus. All the countries in Rio supported that. And this outcome paper contained, in I think 171 paragraphs, the future SDGs. You know, everything was in the SDGs, content-wise, was already in this report, the future we want. So this was the base for the future negotiations, which were then held in New York, at the headquarters of the United Nations, involving every UN member states, all the 193 UN member states, who worked for 2 years, you know, to put all these 171 paras into 17 baskets, which became the SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which is including the entire Sustainable Development Agenda, and breaks them up into 17, well, in fact 15 baskets, because, you know, SDG 17 is financing, and SDG 16 is good governance, improving better governance to implement the SDGs. So SDG 16 is supposed to create a framework for the implementation of the 15 content-based SDGs. So this is what we have, the SDGs, Agenda 2030. They were agreed by consensus, and the whole world committed to implement them. So this is a very good thing, you know. So we can say that the SDGs are our one global adopted agenda for the future. This is a huge achievement. So we know exactly what to do. Nobody can tell us we don't know. We know, we have agreed. We have conceptualized what to do, and we have put it into implementable terms. We know how to do it. You know, the SDGs, and there are the targets, and there are the indicators. So we know exactly, you know, how to create a world which is better, more sustainable, more inclusive, and which leaves no one behind. And that's the most important thing. You know, a world built of solidarity, you know, cooperation, mutual trust, rule-based, respecting human rights, and making sure that everybody has the opportunity to take his own life or his or her own life, because of course gender is also one of the SDGs, very important, take her or his life into their own hands. That's the most important thing. That we are not excluded from opportunities. You know, the issue today is that the world is rich. You know, the world can sustain more than the 8 billion people living here today. You know, but the problem is that so many people don't have access to the resources. natural resources, financial resources, social safety nets. The question is access, exclusion. So therefore, the SDGs are inclusive, including everybody. The MDGs were patronizing. The MDGs were directed to the global south. The global north imposed the MDGs more or less on the global south. The SDGs, no. The SDGs address everybody because there's no perfect country, and no perfect system. And this is your vocation. How do we now implement the SDGs? And if you give me 2 more minutes? Yes. Okay. Now what do we do? So you have to imagine the Secretary General, the present Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, is sitting on the 38th floor of the Secretariat building, and he's inherited 2 huge achievements from his predecessor, the SDGs and the Paris Agreements. These are the biggest achievements. I think unthinkable. When we negotiated them, many of us did not believe that we could achieve that because they were huge obstacles. And I mean, those of you who were involved in the Paris treaties, you know how difficult this was. And because the world wouldn't, still today, there's so many people who negate climate change. They insist that this is not man-made, that we have no doing. They continue with eyes closed, cognitive closure. So it was very, very difficult to bring the world together to adopt the goals, the concept that there is a climate threat. Your father was in the lead role. Ash's father won the Nobel Peace Prize as the chair of the internet there was a report in 2007 on the status of the world, which spelled all of this up, which brought all of this together. And this was a report drawn from hundreds of experts all over the world who worked on different panels. The International Climate Change Panel, it was called, chaired by Ash's father. So this was a breakthrough because it proved to the world scientifically what we need to do. So this was a huge jump. But then it took another 10 years, to get the Paris agreements. So these were huge milestones, and there's no reason to be pessimistic because we have really achieved a lot. And yesterday we discussed rule-based world. We have many rules. We have many concepts. We have the SDGs. We have the Paris agreements. We know we know exactly how to do to contain global warming to 1.2 degrees. We know exactly. It is mathematically, we can calculate mathematically. We know how many hundreds of billions tons of CO2 we are emitting, so we know exactly how much we have to slow down to stay within the goals we have defined ourselves. Unfortunately, we don't do this, so the 1.25 degrees are out of reach. With the effects we're exposed to all the time. All the droughts, all the hurricanes, every natural phenomenon has been becoming more severe, in intensity and in frequency. The only natural phenomenon which has not which is independent from climate change are earthquakes, But all the other natural phenomena depend on changing climate. Anyway, so let's come back to the reality. So we have the SDGs. So now let's go back. The Secretary General sits up there, and he has inherited these 2 huge achievements. And right now, there's nothing in the UN to negotiate. We have these 2 baskets. This is great. So he knows exactly that his tenure as Secretary General will be judged by how far he will get in implementing these 2 achievements. That's his task, And so if, the Paris climate agreements, we can put a little bit in the brackets because there's a lot of energy is now developing all over the world in the private sectors. There's so many actors now pushing the agenda. And if you had followed the recent COP, the conference of parties, of the Paris it's Kyoto agreement, it goes back, but it's still complicated, in Sharm el-Sheikh, there was a big progress, and finally there was a decision to support the global south financially to mitigate climate change and to adapt to climate change, which is a huge, at the Copenhagen Treaty, which I remember correctly was in 2009, this was decided, but it took now 13 years to implement it. So now we have to fill it. We know exactly what to do. We take the right decisions, but the question is always implementation. So, but the SDGs are stuck with the UN. Here the UN has to take leadership, support the 193 member countries with the implementation process of the SDGs. How do we do this? There is progress, of course, and progress every year is evaluated by the High-Level Policy Forum, they call it, which is meeting in New York in July every year, and which in 2 weeks assesses progress of the SDGs. Now, and you can do this very well because we have very clear targets and indicators, so you can assess where progress is. Now, this year was a very important high-level policy forum, and the discussion was, why is progress so slow? And the consensus was because we don't have the money for implementation of the SDGs, because that costs money. It costs money, to come to a transformative change costs money. So how do we get rid of fossil fuels? Where do we?
We have a couple of really good examples. In fact, we love your insights and the others as well.
Okay.
Of two cases, and you're talking about climate change, so I am eager to share. But there's a couple of examples of people who are in different parts of the world, including Africa and in Latin America, where they'll share.
Now I would like to invite our next expert guest, Ms. Sara Wade Epicella, head of the UNDRR's Partnership and Stakeholder Engagement Unit, United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. She'll be telling us about the role of disaster risk reduction in advancing human security in a pre-recorded video, which she just shared with us, as she was not able to join us in person.
Good morning to you all from the UN Office for Disaster Risk Reduction in Geneva, Switzerland. I'm so pleased to join you virtually, and I wish that I could be there in person for the discussions. To all the participants in the 18th World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates, please receive a warm welcome from our office, and thanks for your collective efforts to assure human security in a rapidly changing world. Indeed, human insecurity is on the rise, and disasters are one of the main drivers. Today, I'll spend just a few minutes to talk about the role of disaster risk reduction in advancing human security. Indeed, climate change and other threats are increasingly putting the safety, security, and well-being of people and planet at great risk. And the interconnectedness and interplay of the risks faced are further exacerbating our vulnerability. This is requiring us to quickly develop our capacities to develop in sustainable, innovative, and regenerative ways, to be better able to prevent disaster and to reduce those underlying drivers of risk, such as conflict, inequality, corruption, among others. It calls for us to better understand risk, to strengthen the very systems for risk governance across sectors at different levels and with stakeholders, to continuously invest in resilience, and to continue to enhance preparedness for effective response and to be able to build back better based on an understanding of the first three areas. These are the 4 priorities set forth by Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, the global policy framework adopted by UN member states in March 2015, with a goal to prevent the creation of new risk, reduce existing risk, and invest in resilience. It was the first of the post-2015 development frameworks and is tightly linked to the SDGs and the Paris Agreement. The framework is driven by a whole of government, all of society approach, requiring engagement and partnerships across sectors and stakeholders. It specifically speaks to the role of the stakeholders and does call out roles for youth, among others. This is where human security approach you are all familiar with and the disaster risk reduction framework meet. The Human Security Framework, as you know, is a practical framework to develop integrated policies and programs that also look to prevent, mitigate, and respond to complex challenges and their multidimensional aspects. It also highlights that they must be people-centered, comprehensive, context-specific, and prevention-oriented. The expanding role of disaster risk reduction and Sendai framework in achieving resilience, reducing inequality and poverty, and enhancing human security has been widely discussed in intergovernmental forums and reports. The irreversible consequences and risks and recommendations to integrate disaster risk reduction and the Sendai framework have featured with increasing frequency in a number of these reports, such as the Global Sustainable Development Report, Our Common Agenda of the UN Secretary-General, and recent UNDP reports on human security. Here I'd like to highlight briefly one effort in action. Between 2016 and December 2019, in Tunisia and Mauritania, the Enhancing Community Resilience and Human Security in Vulnerable Communities and Urban Settings through the implementation of the Sendai framework was the first initiative to localize the framework through application of human security. The program enhanced risk reduction and resilience tools, building capacity of local stakeholders to define, propose measures and measure them, and to take a comprehensive and people-centered manner. A city-to-city exchange forum and national dialogues in both countries underscored the effectiveness of the human security approach for translating the framework into much meaningful action at community and municipal levels towards reducing risk and vulnerability and enhancing the resilience of communities that are most affected by disasters. Understanding that your session focuses on sensitizing participants to engage in dialogue about the concept of human security and the importance within the context of climate change, please allow me to share one possible outcome of applying the human security approach to disaster risk reduction and climate action. Zero climate disasters. It is possible. Climate disasters are not inevitable, and there's a lot that we can do to prevent them. We need the political will to scale up comprehensive disaster and risk management, but we can also build capacities and engage the whole of government and whole of society, including and particularly those most left behind. Youth are critical, and movements such as the POP and its goal to support 1.8 billion youth around the world to tackle climate change is necessary. COP28 has already been deemed the solutions COP. This educational workshop on human security focuses on leading by example, which is exactly what we need more of today. I hope you're learning from the experiences being shared and that you will also continue in your path to innovative, regenerative, transformative, and co-creative solutions, building on your strengths and ambitions, your entrepreneurship, and call to effect maximum change in behaviors. We can do that through voting, buying, participating in social, educational, economic, environmental, governance, and familial efforts. We can go a long way to ensure both human and planetary security. I'd also like to just briefly tell you about how you can get involved in some of the UNDRR and DRR efforts. We have a stakeholder engagement mechanism that represents over 19 major groups, including the Group on Children and Youth, who is the current co-chair. This group is leading on developing policy papers to influence global policy in several high-level meetings of the United Nations, including the World Urban Forum and the COPs. They are also contributing to disaster risk reduction fora and knowledge exchange. Included in our efforts are also a youth engagement plan. And what we have seen is the active engagement of youth through several regional efforts, including at our regional platforms for disaster risk reduction. For example, in 2021, youth engagement rose in all regions, and The first ever youth forum for disaster risk reduction was featured at the Regional Platform for Americas and the Caribbean. In Africa, with the youngest population, the African Union has also helped establish an African Youth Advisory Board for disaster risk reduction in the continent. It helps to close the gap, contribute to policy making, and advisory. Finally, if you're physically in Korea, you might want to head over to Hwansi in Gyeonggi Province, where we have a life-size Riskland game that helps enable participation, intergenerational learning, and community awareness raising as part of the Korean School Safety Program of UNDRR, the Ministry of Interior and Safety, and Incheon Metropolitan City. So these are a few more examples to inspire your action. Thank you for your attention and enjoy the dialogue today.
Now I would like to invite Mark Sarah, who is a pop youth mentor and an ambassador from Africa. He is currently leading the Pop Sierra Leone initiative and is joining us from Sierra Leone to tell us more about the climate catastrophic events that have been recurring in the country of Sierra Leone. And more so, he'll also be sharing with us a case study in the world format, which we are happy to share with all of you, apart from the presentation that he makes today. Over to you, Mark.
It's a pleasure to be part of this 18th World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates. I'm Axel Kuma from Sierra Leone, the Pop Youth Mentor for Pop Sierra Leone Initiative. Just want to present a case study on the disaster events that occurred in my country for the past few years. As you all know, Sierra Leone is located at the West African coast, bordered by Liberia and Guinea. Sierra Leone has two seasons. As you know, we have the rainy season and the dry season, and based on that, we are highly vulnerable. Our vulnerability includes the high dependence of agriculture, natural resources, which is coupled with poverty, unemployment, and environmental degradation. Our vulnerability leaves Sierra Leone to climate impact and other disaster events which has occurred during the past years. I can recall sometimes in 2017, around August 11 to 14, we are having heavy downpour of rains, which affected the mountainous part of Freetown, our capital city. And there was a landslide, a mudslide, which occurred in the morning hours of August 14. This landslide damaged several houses, structures, killed residents, about 10,000 of people, which lives were lost. Properties worth millions of dollars were damaged and destroyed. Electricity was cut down as a result of many electrical poles that were damaged and cables that were destroyed as a result of the heavy downpour of rains and the mudslide. The aftermath of this disaster, areas that were destroyed was 116,766 kilometers wide of area that was covered by the mudslide, and roads linking the Kamayama, Kanigo, Babaduri, the Regents Channel were all covered and destroyed as a result of the mudslide. Over millions of dollars cost worth of properties that belongs to the Electricity Distribution Supply Authority were damaged and destroyed. More than 3,000 people were left homeless as a result of the disaster. An initial estimate of the death toll was 300. But after after rescue officers went through the data, it was discovered that over 1,000 people were lost, that were covered by the mudslide. Some were left homeless, and it was highly pathetic. As you can see, the Sugarloaf Mountain, which was destroyed and which covered millions of people. Also, sometimes in August this year, August 28th, of threats of heavy rain. Yes, increase in vulnerability due to climate catastrophic events includes, we have sea level rise threatened, which is lowering the coastal Sierra Leone. Particularly vulnerable are the communities of Krube, Muawaf, increased coastal floods events, coastal erosion, reduction in freshwater quality, pollution, displacement, loss of property, reduction in groundwater resources, and a reduction in agricultural production. All of those are vulnerabilities that we've encountered in Sierra Leone as a result of heavy downpour of rains and climate disaster events. In August 28th this year, there was another landslide which occurred in the western areas of the country, especially in Kanike, Colvert, Kanigo, and Tengbe Town, which extended to Kisi, and also many houses were destroyed, major roads were blocked, and heavy flood there was heavy flood which destroyed properties, and many houses were blown off and damaged and destroyed, as a result of the heavy downpour of rain and the landslide which occurred at the Kanigo area. Interventions provided were foodstuff were provided for victims. Some victims were hospitalized, and during the last 5 years, flooding is not unusual in Sierra Leone, where unsafe housing in makeshift settlements can be swept away by heavy rains. The rains often hit areas and in around Freetown, an overcrowded coastal city of more than 1 million people. Sierra Leone experienced a particularly wet rainy season within the capital city of Freetown in the western area of the country, experiencing 41 inches, which is 1,000 millimeters of rainfall from July 1st, 2017, leading up to the mudslides, nearly tripling the area's seasonal average. Sierra Leone's meteorological department did not warn residents to leave areas prone to flooding in time. From August 11 to 14, Freetown faced severe flooding in the city and threats for the area in people and left thousands homeless. Continue, please. Next slide, Kumal. Hello, Kumal. Yeah. In August 11 to 14, in Freetown, Overlook Lake collapsed, triggering mudslides in the early morning of August 14. In 2017, which damaged or completely many still asleep who were trapped inside. The collapse of the mountainside took place in 2 stages, with the lower slope slide into the Babadori River Valley, and 10 minutes later, the upper portion collapsing, resulting in a tidal wave of mass and debris. High collapse of the upper mountainside, tree trunks, and other materials advanced towards the main river channel, Lumley Lake, with a wall of flood water leading in front. This was the catastrophic event that occurred in 2017, which led to the mass destruction of property and the killing of over 1,000 people. Next slide, Kumar. Hello. Yeah, the aftermath of that event. The disaster caused damage to property in an area of 116,766 kilometers, which is 1,200,000 56,860 communities was lost. 8 Kamayama and Kanigo took moderate or severe damage, and 2 road bridges on the Regent River channel were impacted, mounted to one occurred in several communities, partly due to electricity distribution and supply authorities, EDSA, temporarily taking certain areas off the grid to avoid electricity incidents. The damage to EDSA's infrastructure totaled $174,000. More than 3,000 people were left homeless by the disaster. In initial estimates of the death toll placed the number at 300, but rescue and aid workers cautioned that the several rates of many of the 600 people still missing were slim. By August 27, local government and ministry officials reported 1,000 fatalities during religious services honoring the victims. The final official death toll declared 1,141 deaths or missing. Homes in Freetown were engulfed after part of the falling heavy rain early on Monday. Many victims were still asleep in their beds when disaster struck. It is feared the number of deaths will rise further. Another 3,000 people were estimated to have lost their homes. Next slide, Kumar. This is a photo showing the Sugarloaf Mountain, which collapsed and led to the mudslide. And this was the mountain that covered many houses and killed thousands of people. You know, this is a picture showing the Sugarloaf Mountain at the top of Freetown mountainous area. Next slide. As you can see, this is the flooding, severe flooding in the city and its surrounding suburbs. You know, most of the makeshift houses around this area were blown off, were washed away by the erosion and the high speed of the flooding, you know. And this was the reason many lives were lost, you know. Yeah. As you can see the other picture, you can see saturated debris of large boulders and tree trunks sites where they lost their lives due to the mudslide incident that occurred that and victims, you know, people were the country was in a very sorrowful manner at that time, you know, and this was so devastating to people and our communities. Next slide, come on. Increase in vulnerabilities due to climate catastrophic events. You know, we have sea level rise threats, lowering the coastal Sierra Leone, particularly vulnerable are the communities like Krube, Moawaf, are the most vulnerable communities. You know, increased in coastal flood events are also vulnerabilities. Coastal erosion, reduction in freshwater quality, population displacement, you know, loss of property, reduction in groundwater resources, and reduced agricultural potential for coastal areas. You know, for example, the loss of mangroves, you know, due to the erosion and all other climate disasters, we've lost many mangroves around the coastal area, you know, and those are potential expected impacts that we are highly vulnerable to as a country in Sierra Leone, you know, especially the capital city of Freetown. Also, changes in flooding, rainfall patterns, and droughts will also adversely affect human health by increasing the livelihood of particular diseases, example, cholera, diarrhea. You know, those are also diseases that affect people at those areas. They are highly vulnerable to those diseases. Flooding regularly affects Sierra Leone during the rainy season due to heavy precipitation of and storms surge along the coast. You know, these events take a lot of agricultural production, infrastructure, people's homes, public health, and biodiversity along the coastal area. You know, those are all of the vulnerabilities that our country usually experience, and we are highly prone to those vulnerabilities because of all these climate disasters. Next slide. For recent climate activities or events that occurred, that we experienced, on the 28th August 2022, this date informed us another yes, recent climate events occurred on the 28th August 2022, which led to a flash flood and landslide in some communities in the western area, as a result of torrential rains. In Kanike, Colvert, Canigo, and Temple Town, some houses and major roads were reportedly flooded, leaving residents trapped in the lagging waters and properties destroyed. In Lukin Town, there was a landslide that covered 2 houses, and some people were dead, as a result of the landslide. For almost a total of 8 residents dead, and properties destroyed. Only a kid of 7 years old was rescued, and she was taken to hospital, and she recovered her health. As you can see, this is a photo showing the landslide, the mudslide at Kanike, and also you can see volunteers that rescued the child. Youth volunteers that rescued the child along during that event. Next slide, come on. Also in Brook Street, there was a perimeter fence that collapsed. Cassava Farm, there was a building that collapsed. And also in McKinney, where I'm staying in the northern province of Sierra Leone, there was a heavy storm that destroyed houses, residents, and left people homeless. Property were damaged, amounting to thousands of dollars. Next slide, come on. This is a summarized data of the data that we collected. The event was a mudslide event, and there was a heavy flooding, rain, and storm. The triggering factors was as a result of deforestation and climate vulnerabilities within the country. The location is Freetown, western area of Sierra Leone. And affected areas was about 15,757 meter square area that was affected during the August 28th incident. And number of people dead were 8. Only one was rescued, that a 7-year-old child that was rescued. Organizations that provided relief were the government of Sierra Leone, Sierra Leone Red Cross, United Nations, UNICEF, Tangluma Foundation, Federation, the National Disaster Management Agency and its partners, the National Youth Council, where I'm currently volunteering as a youth leader for my district. We provided support and relief, emergency relief to the people and the victims. Amount of $700,000 was spent in all those relief activities that rescued some of the victims in that incident. Next slide, man. Yeah, our long-lasting recovery activities were, there was activities for cleaning drainages and clearing the mud, and also engagement by the National Disaster Management Agency, engaging community stakeholders and on how to evict them from disaster-prone areas. That were all our activities that we embarked on, in order to ensure that we mitigate the issue of those incidents. Next slide. My role as a youth leader. I was part of the National Youth Council as I'm a volunteer. We volunteered and we are part of the rescue team that we mobilize volunteers and also engage, bring in our youth volunteers that rescue the victims and also collected data. And from the data that we collected so far, we documented 8 fatalities, 6 at Looking Town, 1 at Mount Orel, and 1 at Blackhall Road. The 5 victims who sustained injuries were being treated at Connaught Hospital. Challenges faced. The challenges we faced were that were inadequate resources, rescue equipment, including safety guards, vehicles, and other resources were challenging for the rescue team. Also, shelter for the displaced people is a key challenge and unsolvable problem that is there and there are a little or no plan, for shelter relocation for the displaced people. That's the biggest challenge for the victims.
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Ricardo.
So do you want to go ahead?
Yes, please. He's in Venezuela.
So,
Go ahead, Ricardo.
so may I share my presentation?
Yes.
So you
Can
want
you
me to share
share
some?
with us in about 2 to 3 minutes, please? Just share with us the highlights, Ricardo, in a couple of minutes or 3 minutes, please.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, of course. So I'm from Venezuela. You probably have heard a lot about my country, but not necessarily for the right reasons. Venezuela is actually a beautiful country. We are considered one of the most diverse countries in the world. But Venezuela also have a phase, let's call it a political phase, which is pretty dark. My country is actually facing what I call kind of a persecution. We've been experiencing many social problems here, and which is also are in some way more pronounced when it comes to climate change. So Ivan, if you can go a little bit moving forward, images. I recently have experience when it comes to, let's call it this persecution in my country when I was protesting in favor of the United Nations Observatory mission. Here, as in order for us, it was very important. It was just a group of child, let's call it child, people around 13, no more than 18 years old. And we were surrounded by 20 armed men. They were police officers, let's call it that way. And they were wearing schools as masks, as it was some kind of carnival, and that kind of things. And we were doing anything wrong. We were basically demanding our rights, and we were actually speaking about the problems that are affecting us and that our country doesn't want to talk about publicly. So more recently in Venezuela, we were experiencing the rainy season. And what I've been noticing recently is that in my country, it's rain comes harder and harder and harder. Um, we have 2 seasons here. We're a tropical country. We have 2 seasons. And we have the drought season, which is basically considered in wildfires, confronting wildfires totally. The place where I live have been affected by that, and a lot when it comes to our quality of life. And well, when there's no fire, then we have the rains and the floods. More recently, my country have experienced the tragedy of Las Tejerias. Las Tejerias was, well, Las Tejerias is actually was a place housed to around more than 1,000 people. And now it's a disaster place. I have friends who have tended there. We've been doing some collecting for the people of Las Tejerias. And I don't know if Ivan, you can go moving forward so they can see the images. And forgive me about the quality, maybe of the imagery, because in my country, all that information is restricted. So I have to use VPN and a lot of process used to access. What you're seeing right now is my city. This was a couple, I think it was in August, September, November, one of these 3 days, but it's actually pretty common. As you can see, it's basically under the water. We experience this all the rainy season. At the moment, there are 64,000 people affected around the country for the rains. As you know, our infrastructure is pretty old and it's pretty weak, which when it comes to rain, it basically means infrastructure being collapsed. And also means people losing their lives, which is the sad part about this. Because sometimes when we speak about countries, we speak, oh no, they're facing this, they're facing that. And also we have a government who's supposed to speak in behalf of all of us. But the truth is it's not like that. Actually, there's no data, there's no public data about how many rains we've experienced because 70% of all let's call it climate institutions are actually closed. They are not currently working. So we cannot predict what when it comes to the weather. This situation is mainly caused by the tropical waves. We experience around 60 tropical waves per year. And the tragedy of Las Tejerias, Ivan, you can go further, just a little bit further. You can pass some pictures there. Was actually, if I'm not mistaken, the tropical wave number 49. Actually, it's a fun name for because it meant the life of around 49 people. What I can say is that it wasn't the only tragedy. We haven't experienced something like this in the tragedy of Vargas by the end of 1999. And that's my city, actually, what you're seeing at this moment in the screen. Use it the night, which is mostly the rain start and we're not prepared for it. So we realized when the water is entering into our homes. Also in El Castaño, which is a city in Maracay, a nearby city, just a couple of minutes from where I live, they experienced a landslide. The landslide actually affected all the houses of the community El Castaño, which a close friend of mine live. They are basically, they survive because they're stayed in the second floor of the house, but some people wasn't that lucky for saying it somehow. So I was just having a meeting, if I'm not mistaken, in the university when we received the news. And we were actually very, very concerned about the situation because it wasn't just random people, it wasn't just a number, it wasn't 40,000 people. It was a very close friend of mine and I was about to lose her. Ivan, if you can go the next videos or the next images, please. Go to the next. I don't know if you can hear me. So, as I was telling you, that's not the only problem we experience. Oh, that's an image of La Tejeria tragedy, which was a landslide. As I told you, my friends, a lot of friends, I'm a journalist, and we tried to cover, to take some pictures to try to go there, but it was pretty impossible because the army officers wouldn't let you go in, even if you were about to deliver some, some aid, to deliver some things. We made a collection of food, water, and also clothing for the people. The government said they provide around 600,000 tons of food and supplies, but actually we are not sure about how that was, let's call it, given, invested. There's no record of it. That's important part. You can pass the images. One of my friend went there. She was with the Notitarde, who was is one of the most important media companies here in Carabobo State, where I live. And even if you go through their pages and you try to find information on scholar flute or anything, you won't find it. You may find information by writing, let's call it, a strong rain. We might experience strong rains, and then you can find something, but the terms of flutes, tragedies, and that kind of things are actually very, very hard to find in national media, institution, companies, and more. You can go to the last pictures, Ivan, just to finish the idea. We haven't just take a relief of the rains. We are still experiencing rains. Actually, I took a moment to enter this session because I was facing one, and my signal actually was pretty messed. And what you're seeing right there is my house. Actually, I lived in that apartment, and that was right behind I live. We couldn't breathe that night, and of course, or we don't have helicopters. We don't have that. We're supposed to have, but in reality, we don't. So basically, we have to wait for the fire to destroy everything, and then we can like start acting or start containing it. But the reality is not. It's always like that. There's a lot of wildfires here in Valencia. In the drought season, is wildfires. People affected, not being able to breathe. I have a lot of problems when it comes to breathing asthma, and the truth is that makes it even worse. And we can go to hospitals and clinic institutions because they are basically they exist, but they have no capacity for people. And the private ones are actually pretty high for us to cost. When I mean high, I mean thousands of dollars, and the common Venezuelan people, we don't have that access. The truth is, also, we experience a lot of poverty in this country. Venezuela is a beautiful country, but also is one of the most unequal countries in the world, if I can say it somehow. We actually experience a growing of economical situation after 7 years of no evolution. And this year we experienced, but it actually was inequal. It was like inequality rise. And just want to share that what is like living in this country, a little bit about it. I hope it's enough for you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining. I know that it was a challenge, but I just want to say that, we have a number of other voices of people who are just like you and I, who are facing all kinds of challenges. This is one voice from Venezuela. We would like very much is to, talk to you about what you think could be what is the part we have to play? Because I think the important thing for us to take away is that, as Tom shared, and he's so much rich experience in terms of, the SDGs and the fact that we have a common goal, that we have a window of opportunity in which we can all work together. And I just want to say, with the POP movement, where POP stands for Protect Our Planet, that's really what we believe in. We believe in the fact that by coming together and working with young people and leaders like, the many leaders we are here with, we can get there. But the important thing is that we need to think about what action we can take, because we all have a role to play. So, Tom and I were wondering if we could hear from you in terms of what you think you can do and what we can do together. So what are your thoughts about stories like Ricardo's, and then we've got Mark, and we've got other people who are unable to be with us here, but I'm sure all of us have something to share. So love to hear from you in terms of what you think is possible in terms of action. Yes, too. I'll hand over to Tom, if I may, to help us through some of the next steps in the conversation, especially in terms of the role of youth, please, in achieving human security.
I've tried to bring together the challenges. Now, I think let's start the conversation. All of you, maybe you have good examples how you are personally contributing to the issue is always implementation of all these rules, but many of them become dead wood. Because once we have spent so much time in negotiating these agreements, that we seem to lack energy to implement them afterwards. So what do you think is important, what are the important next steps to implement these SDGs, the agenda for our future, and what can you do, and what are you doing already to speed this up? Where can you assume your own responsibility? This is my question. Please don't be shy, come up. Yeah. You know, short statements, if possible, so quite a few of you can talk, and so we can have something really interesting to take away from here, from this meeting.
And I'm sure all of you are doing something, so let's hear it. Thank you.
Just maybe tell us your names before you talk and where your country you're coming from.
Okay, hello, my name is Christopher. I'm from Honduras, and right now I'm a international development and cooperation student here in Korea. But before arriving to Korea, I was a deputy manager for an NGO that focuses on climate change and youth activism. So in Honduras, I was in charge of founding the third government, or like a local government network for sustainable development. So we work in different policies. Latin America actually have a lot of waste, and we don't have policies within government for recycling or waste management. So what we did is that we declare with some of the local governments within our network that they will stop using single-use plastic. So certain cities, they have no more like big companies, plastic products like Coca-Cola. So we're using just glass bottles. So that's one of the main activities we have work, and also we have development programs for capacity building for the local governments, so they can receive these workshops related to climate change and sustainability, and how they can implement it in different courses within a period of academical background during high school.
Great, that's excellent. And where did you say you're based now? Okay, excellent. Yes, please. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your speech today. My name is Grace Kim, and my major is Global Cooperation in Sungkyunk's University. Few years ago, my teacher's father went to North Korea, but he was imprisoned for 3 years without no reason. So we had this campaign called Free USA 3, and we posted on social media, and we sent emails to the government about that. And luckily, he was able to go back to US safely, but yeah, I think it was really unfair. And I have a question. Can I ask one? I read a news about the soccer player in Iran is about to get executed because he participated in the anti-government demonstration recently. And how do you think the global society should act about that?
Yes, this is a very sad question, you know, and we have been following what's going on in Iran. The people in Iran seem to be doing the best they can. They go on the streets, they take their life in their hands and demonstrate. But the cost is enormous, unfortunately. That's what we've been witnessing. So, you know, it is very difficult to say what we can do there. You know, there we can, of course, you know, there can be public pressure, always reference to the human rights. This has been done. Also, you know, there's a high commissioner for human rights in Geneva with an office, a full network. So they are always monitoring the human rights situation in countries. It's extremely sad. to be true, and I cannot tell you what we can do here, except talking about it, and this is, don't have an answer to this. It's too sad. It's a highly developed country in so many ways. It's such an old culture, the country of the prophets. There's so much wisdom in the country, and nevertheless, we are now executing people who take to demonstrate, or who just don't comply with unacceptable laws. So this is an extremely sad situation. But there are so many sad situations. There are always wars going on, and what do we do with the Ukraine war right now? It is so difficult to say. To promote a negotiation solution, but there seems to be so little will on both sides right now to negotiate. All of the leaders tell us they don't want to negotiate until they tell us something which is illusionary. So it's sometimes it's difficult not to become cynical, but we can't. We cannot afford that. What we have to do is strengthen civil society. Of course, that's the most important thing. To hold our leaders accountable. In this whole implementation processes. I think that those who negotiate the SDGs, they did mean it. But then they leave New York, they go home, they face so many other issues, they want to be re-elected, they don't have the money, they don't have the energy, and they're not held accountable. What's the greatest thing in democracy is that we can hold those who we elected accountable to do what they have promised to do. And one thing is to not elect them anymore at the next chance, but that's not enough. They get away too often with unfulfilled promises. So I'm a strong believer in an active civil society, who assumes responsibility. The politically active citizen, to get up, to do what all of you are doing. First, to become active, to learn, what is the situation, and then to define opportunities where you can add value, either founding an NGO. The SDGs for me are like a wall with a puzzle with thousands of stones, and they all interact. Doesn't matter where you start building the puzzle. Each puzzle you add to the picture makes the picture more visible. And the more puzzles we add, the cleaner and clearer the picture the result becomes. So all the SDGs are interconnected. Doesn't matter where you start, you have to start somewhere. Everything contributes to the final result. So when you start planting trees, or you start trying to promote laws, ruling out plastic, cleaning the oceans, all of this is very important. Making people available, aware of what's, all these processes of making people aware what is in their own interest. That it might not be in their own interest to continue living as we are. It's superficial, So this is all processes where all of you can contribute. Stand up. You have to be aware of one thing. We are the generation, and I'm part of the generation, who is irresponsibly wasting the resources which should support your life. You have to hold us accountable. You have to stand up and say, we don't accept this anymore. Your elder generation, you have provided us a world in which we can't live anymore. It's a different situation. There have been cycles, myths, economic myths of indefinite growth. Capitalism was nurturing itself from the myth of unlimited growth. We have come to the recognition that there is no unlimited growth, because there are finite resources. And right now there's no growth in the world. we are watching this recession in many countries, and even before COVID. Ever since the financial crisis 2008, growth has been in the north 1%, 1.5%. We were lucky. In some countries, the growth was out much higher, of course, but globally, growth was very, very little. So we have to recognize that the system that we have been relying on is no longer sustainable. That all this measuring we have been doing, GDP growth, is maybe not relevant because it does not have an impact on the world. So how do we measure growth and wealth and development in the future? What are the indicators? Are we indicating access to medicine, to water, social safety nets, and not only numbers? The world has become so rich in the last decades, but the number of people who are hungry has also grown.
Thank you for your sharing. So I'm glad to be here with you guys. So as you described before, I'm Donato. I'm from East Timor. Currently, I'm studying here in South Korea. Here, I study Asian civil society leadership. So, as you mentioned before, that in the post-Cold War, we have the new paradigm of a concept of security, from traditional security, state-centered security, moving to human security. So, as we are post-conflict society, the peace is very essential for us. So, I want to share my experience. As post-conflict society, we have been facing a lot of diverse of structural violence and cultural violence. In East Timor, today we're facing a lot of divisions between youth because of the martial art resistance in East Timor and also the gangsters. So this is the motive and the reason why I built my own NGO, civil society organization, which is working for youth, peace and security. With youth, peace and security, I started on 2016. We established, we create a space for youth to come discuss about sharing how empowering you to be a peace builder at the grassroots levels. So, as you mentioned before, the community security and also personal security is very necessary. So, I have a question. So what do you think about the notions of human security should be addressed in the institutional levels? Because if we are dealing with, as we are civil society organization from the grassroots level, we're dealing with the individual level and also society level and also social structure level, but we are not, sometimes it's hard to deal with in the institutional level. You might give some idea and then we can work on that. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. I'm a practical person. I'm also asking myself this question: what can each one of us do, in our environment? The great thing about the SDGs is they're inclusive. We cannot leave implementation to them, to the governments. The SDGs address everybody. We will only be successful if we build a global coalition of governments, academia, private sector, NGOs, people of goodwill, bring all the capacities together. We cannot do it without without the private sector, of course, but we cannot do it without the civil sector, civil society. Because civil society, politicians are normally elected for a number of years. So their thinking is short, They think in terms of 4 years. How can it be re-elected again? So civil society has more long-term issues. You are for the sustainability of issues. So you have to bring this time dimension into the discussion and hold politicians, decision makers, institutions accountable. There's a lot of pressure, and institutions move, once they want to be re-elected. So once they have the very, of course, they're very often populist, they say what they think will get them votes. But so you have to build coalitions to make them sure, you will get our votes only if you do that and that. And if this becomes big enough, you'll have impact. There are many, many examples, and each one of you here is a living example of having impact. It's very difficult to measure impact. Many of these Peace Nobel laureates you're meeting here didn't know that they will become laureates one day. They started their mission. They defined where they have to add value. They didn't accept the status quo. They started moving, they assumed responsibility. And then they were successful, and the environment was conducive. So they became shining examples for all of us that we have to assume responsibility. So this is what we have to do. And the situations in each country are different. Each one of us has a different life situation. So we have to define what can we do. Some of you are in university. You can mobilize your people in university. Some of you are working in the private sector. You can start introducing the idea of social business, of circular economies to reduce waste. There are so many things we can do which add to the big puzzle. And once we reach a certain mass, global mass, we will scale up immediately. So the question is how to amplify what we are doing.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for your presentation. And I'm Hyun Jung from Summa Women's University, and I.
Can you just, when you talk, take your mask off, maybe?
Oh, okay.
It's very difficult to talk still with your mask.
Okay, I'm Hyun Jung from Summa Women's University, and actually mine is a question, not a comment. And I heard that the SDG goals would be regenerated as a new form, maybe in a few next years, maybe in 2025, not so sure. But so I like to ask your personal opinions about what kinds of new goals should be added in a new generated SDGs.
Yeah, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that the question is that do you think there'll be another generation of the SDGs?
What kinds of goals should be added in the new gen?
In my country, Austria, we have a pragmatic saying: "The perfect is the enemy of the good." The world is not perfect. What we have is the SDGs. The SDGs are not perfect, but they're great. And implementation of the SDGs will really get us ahead. So we have a 15-year cycle now for the SDGs. So we have to work really very hard to implement as many aspects of the SDGs as possible. And then we assess every year the progress. And then when the cycle comes to an end, we'll assess what will the next step be. So I think we have to be a little bit pragmatic here and don't construct a perfect world right now, but contribute to a better world, each one of us. This would be my advice here. I think you also want the floor.
Hello everybody, my name is Mariam. I'm from Pakistan. I just had something to share as you asked about the solutions. I've done my bachelor's from National Defense University, Pakistan. So my university came up with an initiative like they have made it mandatory, like public service, community service in their curriculum. So now what they do is like in every course we have an assignment, like sometimes it's like community service such as food drive or maybe plantation drive. So if you do it, you get like additional marks. If you don't do it, like the marks get deducted. So I think in my opinion, no matter how much you say, people, even if they're aware, they don't take steps. Either it's like, if it has to be like a carrot or a stick situation. Either there should be a punishment or a reward for anything, so that can add more. It's not a big initiative, but still.
Absolutely. I mean, there's always been a balance, of course. The best way, of course, is that we become conscious what we need to do. I always thought the most important role the UN is playing is its advocacy function, to help all the people understand what is in their own interest. I give an example. What I'm doing is anti-corruption. So we have we negotiated this UN anti-corruption convention. Now, corruption is an old issue, thousands of years. But people couldn't fight it, because there was no means to fight corruption. There were no legal means. And normally the corrupt people were those who had power. So it was like a shadow in society, and people just started accepting it. Now we have a convention, which gives us for the first time the opportunity to fight corruption globally on the basis of the rule of law, excluding impunity if implemented. So first step, make people understand that they can fight corruption. There's no longer the necessity to accept it. Weakening of societies, draining society of money, keeping us away from resources. It's our responsibility and we can do it. This is the first step. Second step would be to recognize that fighting this issue, this vice, global vice, corruption, is not a private affair. It's not only in your individual interest, it's in a social interest. It's a social imperative, because we can no longer afford the cost of corruption. We have to stand up and make sure that we hold those who are corrupt accountable. And the third step would be to learn how to do it. So technical assistance, capacity building for practitioners, for everybody. Going to seminar, learn, check our homepage, see how you can increase your procurement, how, what you can do, how you can learn about corruption is everywhere. Corruption is like a cancer. It's metastasis into every aspect of society. It is everywhere. It's in education, it's in health, it's in the fisheries, it's in the environment. Corruption penetrates the whole world and siphons out capacities, weakens us, limits our capacities. So, so we have to learn, how to do it. How do we provide information, transparency? That's the precondition to fight corruption. Training journalists, whistleblowers, people who put things into the open, as a first step. For example, so all of these things can be very limited, very small, but they all contribute tremendously, to what's going on. In the context of the SDGs, what do you think is the yearly global military expenditure right now? We're always talking about, here in this context, we've been talking for many summits, how to limit military expenditures. What do you think military expenditure is today? About whole world, 1 year. It's growing. It's more than $2 trillion a year. What goes into ARCs? Now, what do you think is the total corruption asset? How much money is siphoned out of the global economies by corruption? Sorry? Globally in 1 year. We don't know, because we cannot measure corruption, unfortunately. We can only assume and assess, but it might be more than global military expenditure. But we have not been talking about this corruption yet. It's not an issue. We have been discussing military expenditure limiting to produce the so-called peace dividend. We have been thinking, what do we do with the money we save from military expenditure? We have gone nowhere, because military expenditure has been growing every year. But we have not been discussing other so-called illicit financial flows, we call them. This is this illicit, also illegitimate, also invisible flows, which are draining our economies, made up by 4 aspects: tax evasion, tax avoidance, bribery, and corruption. Trillions every year, siphoned out of productive economies, cannot be compensated for, neither by direct investments, nor by official development assistance, nor by remittances. There's a huge gap. So this is something I just want to make you aware, in the approach. Yes, there's a question.
Sorry, it's not actually a question. I just want to make one comment following up. It's not about corruption, but I wanted to tell you about a new exciting campaign where we're talking about what can you do. My name is Liz. I'm from Canada, and I'm part of a new exciting campaign, a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. We're trying to take examples from disarmament, landmines, nuclear weapons, where we just have to stop. We have to get off oil, coal, and gas. The Paris Agreement doesn't really talk about fossil fuels. So we have a new treaty. We are working with the Fridays for Future movement, the youth movements globally, to urge governments to stop new expansion of oil and gas projects and to phase out existing ones and ramp up the renewable energy and the just transition. So if you want to join us, we have Nobel laureates, academics, youth, health groups. We have so many people joining us, parliamentarians. Tuvalu, Vanuatu have called for treaty negotiations to begin soon. So fossilfueltreaty.org, we welcome you to join our movement. Thank you. Thanks for giving me the floor.
Thank you. Your name is Liz? Liz. Yeah. Thank you, Liz. Thank you. Now, that's of course very important. And today's progress. The last COP decided to phase out coal. They didn't talk about other fossil fuels, but coal, of course, they phased out. And yesterday we got the news of fusion technology. Yes. This might be also a new technology which might help us, because of course we want to get rid of fossil fuels as quickly as possible, because they produce CO2, but of course it's much more than fossil fuels. All the methane, which is captured in Siberia, and which is now released when climate change, unfreezes the tundra, and methane has a much higher negative effect than CO2, for example. So, but there's so many issues out there which you can get involved and which you have to look at. I just wanted to mention this because in the context of implementation of the SDGs, we have been discussing at the biggest impediment, and there's now at the last High-Level Policy Forum, every delegation who took the floor pointed at these illicit financial flows as the biggest impediment for the implementation of the SDGs. And so this is a new discussion which is starting, and this is where all of you, of course, can also contribute. Produce a more transparent, rule-based society where impunity is ruled out, where corruption is made more expensive, where the perpetrators cannot rely on getting away with it, where we repatriate illicit funds which have been exported and deposited in bank accounts in Liechtenstein, UK, and Switzerland. So if we bring this back, the perpetrators cannot rely on getting a hand of them, which might raise the threshold because there's less incentive. So there are many ways of doing that. I just want to make you aware that it has to be a societal approach. For me, fighting corruption, we have become the flag bearers on this issue now. And I have decided to spend now all my energy on that. And we are doing a global movement, we're an international organization and a university. We're offering postgraduate master's degrees in anti-corruption for practitioners, mostly, lawyers, prosecutors, judges, judicial personnel, academicians, to learn how to fight corruption in their environment. So they take a course, 1.5 years, they get a master's degree, they return to their job, they do their job better, and they can contribute better to building resilient anti-corruption systems in countries. First, criminalizing corruption in the legal system, and then making sure that this is also implemented. Yeah, I don't want to just promote what we're doing, but I think this is definitely a path forward. The website is IACA, International Anti-Corruption Academy, IACA.int. And this is our website. If you're interested, check it. We have a lot of offers. Quite a few of them are free of cost. We're international organizations, of course. We have to finance what we're doing. So there is, we have to charge tuition for our projects, but we have a lot of scholarships. And if you're interested, approach us. But check our home site page first, and all the programs and projects we are offering to help build countries more. We're working very closely with Honduras now. You know, that's our main partners. You know, there's a new, your president spent most of the inauguration speech on fighting corruption. So there's a real strong conviction now, you know, top down and bottom up, that you can only break these vicious cycles by improving the rule of law. Because improving the rule of, we have been discussing the rule of law, you know, we've been discussing now for decades that we have to improve governance, to make investments for development, to increase the impact. But we haven't gotten very far. But now SDG 16 tells us exactly what we have to do to provide the base for the implementation of the 15 SDGs. This is better governance, improve the rule of law, because that improves access to the judiciary, access to the common goods, to clean water, medical services. And, you know, if you, the poorest are the most vulnerable, and it's the women who have to bribe doctors to get medical service for their children in many countries. So it's all about access. And it's also about, you know, what about all this migration issue? Migration is, I think the two biggest challenges in the world are climate change and migration. They're interconnected, of course. So why do people leave their countries? Millions, tens, hundreds of millions of them, you know, because they don't have opportunities. You know, nobody wants to leave his country and his family and his farm. So, okay, just one more minute. So what you have to do is, you know, look at the pull factors we can produce. You have to look at the push factors. Help people create opportunities. You know, access to all these services. And of course, access to the market. So the coffee farmer in Honduras can sell his coffee for a fair price and feed his family. So this family doesn't have to risk their life crossing deserts and working with peyotes, you know, with human traffickers. So this is where we have to approach, building more resilient societies, rule-based, fight corruption, and strengthen the rule of law. So this is the last, you know, Ash is telling me we have to stop. There's another session. So I hope that you know, that inspires you a little bit and gives us some guidance and also some incentive and encourages you that you have to scale up your own commitment and become active, because it's your responsibility for yourself and for others in society. It has to be comprehensive, you know, and we have to be, you know, and society-based, you know, not individualistic. We all have to work within society to just create the better societies where we and our children can live better. Thanks.
Absolutely enlightening. Thank you. And I just want to conclude by saying that, you know, first off, thank you very much, and I'd like to thank Ricardo, Mark, and the rest of the POP family too for joining, and each one of you. And to say that, you know, we do have a role to play. I know there are systems, but just like Tom said, you know, we have to get together to beat the corruption. We have to get together to overcome those barriers, and it's ultimately because it's our future. And the world that we make will depend on the actions we take. So I just want to say, I know there are a number of amazing things happening with all of you here, but just keep it coming. And my congratulations again, and thank you so much, Tom. This has been hugely enlightening. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you, Rick, Mark, and Drisha, Komal, everybody else, Dr. Norma, Emmanuel, all of you for, you know, for helping to come together. I know we're closing out. As we close out, if you can just put on the video for some, you know, reflections for all of you, and we look forward to staying in touch. And also the POP Movement's website is thepopmovement.org. So, you know, look forward to working with all of you. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.